Hello, F2 Fan 5000 here with driver ratings and race analysis of the Longbeach Indycar Round 2026. I want to do some analysis of the race. It seemed very hard to overtake at Longbeach, and I feel as though this race is a perfect example of why the safety cars can spoil races. And in fact, I would say in this instance was a poor decision to bring the safety car out. It's created more trouble rather than it's worth, because it's what happened is that they've bunched all the cars up and they've all gone into the pits all at once. So we have 24 cars entering the pits all at once, and there's a lot of pressure on the mechanics and the tyre changers and all those people, and there's not much space, and it's really not safe. And then I believe that Will Power hit one of the pit crew, and people will say that's Will Power's fault. I'm not defending him I want to say it's really not his fault, because you saw, if you're watching the race, the replays where their cars are going 2, sometimes 3 wide, and a car is coming out of their pit box, and then there's 2 cars going side by side. To me, that's completely unacceptable, and I don't see the point of bunching up all the cars before they go into the pits. These cars were spaced out nicely during the race, and even if they all came in at that time, it's already stressful for the people in the pits. But when you bunch them all together, it really ramps up the stress, the pressure on the pit stops, the people there, and we've seen some drivers lose positions in the pits and other drivers gain position in the pits. And the final result is not very satisfying. I thought IndyCar had a thing called the full course yellow, which is like the virtual safety car in Formula 1 and Formula 2. But it seems as though they didn't use that. And for that piece of debris that was on the track, I would say the order has been changed greatly. And some drivers have been advantaged and others disadvantaged. And it's just basically a race decided in the pit stops. And as I said, overtaking was very close to impossible if the cars were in a similar level. And I think it's really poor how it was handled. And if they had the full course yellow or the virtual safety car, then they should have used that, and then at least these cars are spread out when they go into the pits. The other thing from a racing perspective is, because all the cars pitted on the same lap under this safety car conditions, it removes any value of drivers that worked hard to build a buffer to the driver behind, and it also removes any strategy options, right? Like, we're going to pit a lap or 2 later than him. I will pit early, try and undercut. All that's out the window. They all pit on the same lap, and it's the race is completely neutralised and neutered. But I think Longbeach is good for racing. It's just, for whatever I think the race last year was fantastic, but this year's a bit disappointing. Now I'm going to go through the driver ratings. Joseph Newgarden gets a 6. He was on the alternative strategy. He's trying to make 3 stops work. He was going on soft tyres, driving flat out, but then he came out after his second stop. He came out behind Marcus Armstrong and was stuck behind him and had to pull off a bonsai move to get past him. And he's flat spotted his tyres. So I give Joseph Newgarden a 6. I think that he's put himself under pressure with a average qualifying, a mediocre qualifying session. And of course, as I said, very difficult it seemed this weekend to pull off any overtakes. Scott McLaughlin, he also gets a 6. He gets a good result in the end, but to me, in terms of pace, he was a long way behind his younger teammate David Malukas. He was gifted positions at the pit stops, and generally he's been a bit average, so I'll give him a 6 out of 10. Kyo Collette, car number 4, he also gets a 6 out of 10. He was running the whole race toe to toe with Dennis Hauger, who eventually finished 11th place, and Kyo Collette's finished at the back, so most of the race he's been there with Hauger. And then when the pit stops happen, the pit stop drama is centred around Kyo Collette, and unfortunately I believe this left rear tyre changer, they're the ones in the firing line, gets hit by Will Power, and then of course that holds him up in the pits. And then something that they said in the broadcast that he got a penalty. I didn't see that part of it. I didn't see him come and do a drive through. Maybe that happened under the safety car, they didn't show it, but the whole thing with his race is it was undone in the pits. But in the early part of the race, his pace was right there with Dennis Hauger. And Patricio Award, or Pato as they like to call him, gets an 8. Considering his high standards, his lofty standards that we usually expect to come from him, I was slightly disappointed. Yet again, I think it's been a disappointing season generally for Award. However, in this race he was a long way ahead of both of his teammates, Nolan Siegel and Christian Lundgaard, and he finished in the top 5. So I think it's a fair enough race from him. He did qualify on the front row, but Alex Palou made a fantastic overtake on him early on, and then he sort of was shuffled back in the pack. Maybe he lost positions when the safety car came out, but the thing is, he doesn't look to have this pace to compete with Alex Palou this year, and I expect a little bit more of him, so he gets a solid 8. And Nolan Siegel gets a 6. He had no pace or race. In the early stages of the race, he's running last. He benefited massively during the pit stop phase. I was going to give him a 5, but I give him a 6 because he overtook Rinus VK on the last lap, which I think is an excellent result from him, excellent move. As I said, very difficult to overtake this weekend. The other thing I want to say is I guess his qualifying needs to improve as well. He got, in the early stages, he was running last, and then after the first lot of pit stops, he did move forward a bit. He was in that group with Hauger, Collett, Mick Schumacher, those sort of drivers, Foster, and then he went right ahead in the pit stop in the last lot of pit stops, but I felt like he was a long way behind Patricio Ward, and I was only going to give him a 5 until that last lap overtake. Christian Lundgaard gets a 5. He was behind Patricio Ward and running on the fringes just outside the top 10. The tyre issue that he had, maybe he got a puncture, he had to come into the pits for an extra stop, and that ruined his race. So I'll give him a 5 out of 10. Kiffin Simpson, he gets a 7 out of 10. He finished in the top 10 on merit, and I believe he's been in the top 10 for most of the race, or just outside it. He was faster in qualifying, made it into the top 12. Much better weekend from Kiffin Simpson. But he's still a long way behind both his teammates. His one teammate won the race, the other one's on the podium, but he's in 10th. But just a much stronger weekend. He definitely had the pace under. He was looked solid, competitive, and I think he could have finished a little bit higher as well. And Scott Dixon gets an 8. He was solid, but he was not spectacular. He's running around just outside the top 5 for most of the race, and then he benefits massively in the pit stop phase, and was obvious how hard it was to overtake because he was much faster than the Meyer Shank racing car of Felix Rosenqvist, but just no way for him to get past. So Scott Dixon highlighted the fact that it's very difficult to overtake, running close behind Rosenqvist for a while, but eventually he settled into a 3rd place, a fine podium, but as I said, it was sort of gifted to him. But still, he was running in the top 10 for most of the race, so he gets an 8 out of 10. And Alex Palou gets a 10. I think that until that final pit stop, I feel as though Rosenqvist did a Palou on Palou, and I think that in some way it's hard to justify giving Palou a 10 for the race, because I feel like he was on for 2nd place, and because he's the reigning champion I kind of expect him to win, but he was faultless. And well, he's not faultless because in the qualifying he locked up, but he's still, I would say, almost faultless, especially in the race. He's absolutely faultless. It's not his fault that Felix Rosenqvist decided to drive so well this race. So it's a 10 out of 10 for Palou, and when the chips were down, he was there to pick up the pieces, and that's what he did. And of course he showed how much pace he had in hand by pulling away. Plus, he made that overtake on Ward early in the race, which was fantastic to see as well. David Malukas gets an 8 out of 10. He was easily the fastest Penske driver. He was the fastest in the top 12. His decision to run first in the top 6 seemed to backfire on him, and then it was difficult to overtake. And then, unfortunately, he lost a lot of positions in the pit stop melee on lap 60. He put Newgarden and McLaughlin in the shade, and unfortunately he wasn't able to walk away with the result that he deserved. Actually, I should have given him a 9. He deserved a 9 out of 10. I don't know why I've given him 8. I'll just punish him because that decision to run first in the fast 6 was the wrong decision. I'll just leave it. But in some way he deserves a 9. But in another way he doesn't. So Santino Ferrucci, he's anonymous all weekend. There's nothing much to say about Santino, and he went on the alternative strategy and it didn't make any difference to the lack of pace, didn't get him in front of anybody. Graham Rahal gets a 7. He was faster than his teammates. Well, Louis Foster was close for most of the race, but then towards the end of the race he started dropping back. Maybe he burned out his tyres. Rahal gets a 2nd top 10 finish in a row. Romain Grosjean gets a 5. He was a little bit behind Hauke most weekend, but I feel as though there's some issue that we haven't seen because he came in for his 2nd stop not long after his 1st stop, so maybe he had a puncture. He went to the back. there's not much else to say. He was near the back most of the race, but I feel as though there's something like a puncture or some issue with his car, maybe, that's put him further back in the pack rather than he should be. And Alexander Rossi gets a 6. He was helped by the safety car into the top 10. Drove well generally, but I don't think his qualifying result is very good. Was back in the pack. He did try that bonsai overtake on his teammate early on, and I think he eventually got past Rasmussen. He's faster than Rasmussen, but I'm not sure he would have gotten the top 10 without the safety car. And then Christian Rasmussen, he gets a 5, and he was anonymous, and he's been slow ever since that oval race. Was at Phoenix, where he's doing all those acrobatics all around the place, and ever since he lost that win in the last few laps with that puncture or whatever he had, he's been anonymous. And this was another race to forget for Christian Rasmussen. Will Power gets a 5. The end result doesn't reflect his true pace. He was very solid all weekend until that point. Not quite on the level of his teammate Kirkwood. But he's still competitive in the top 10 all the race, fighting positions, trying to overtake people, but at the end of the day, the result's not there. Of course, he has his part to play in the incident, hitting the left rear tyre changer for Kaya Collette. It's a very unfortunate incident, but I feel as though that's a circumstance created by bunching up all the cars just before they go into the pits, and they all have a pit stop all at once. That's a scenario that creates these sort of incidents. So I wouldn't 100% blame Will Power in that situation, but he should have been more aware, more careful. And there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in that pit lane too, so... But I still think, at the end of the day, you have to be careful of the tyre changes, At the end of the day, he's the one that hit them, and I'll give him a 5 out of 10 because the end result's very poor, but he showed pace. Cole Kirkwood gets an 8. Just another solid drive. Yeah, just another solid drive from Cole Kirkwood. Just being near the top, not necessarily noticeable, but a 4th place, fast, competitive, another good result. He's clearly the closest competitor to Alex Palou this year. Marcus Ericsson gets a 5. I can't believe it, but I feel sorry for Marcus Ericsson. His race was he had car trouble. He pulled off this crazy overtake on Mick Schumacher, and then even though his car was having trouble, he still overtook Schumacher, and then I felt bad for him that he had to retire. I think he was driving well, but the car didn't allow him to see his full potential, though qualifying wasn't very impressive. But he gets a 5. Louis Foster gets a 5. He drove reasonably well. He was the head of the rookie train. I know he's not technically a rookie anymore, but still, you know what I mean. It's the second year. He's the head of the train in front of Hauger, Collett, Siegel and Schumacher, and then the pit stops put him in 10th place, but then his tyres run out quicker than the other drivers around him, and he's dropping through the field, so he gets a 5. I think it's a reasonable race. And Mick Schumacher, I'll give him a 5. I think he was the least impressive driver this weekend. He just, as I said, he got overtaken by Ericsson, even though Ericsson was having car problems. Ericsson caught him unawares. he looked slow, but then other times he looked fast, right? I saw the gap. He was about 10 seconds behind Foster, and then a few laps later he was only 7 seconds behind Foster. But there's nothing special from his weekend. I know it's his first time at the track. He's a rookie. He's still learning. It's probably true for other drivers like Hauker and Collett, because I noticed Indy Next weren't there at Long Beach, so I don't know how well they are familiar with the track. But it's just he just looked slow. But I still give him a 5 because this circuit is very difficult. I know some of these drivers crashed in practice and that, but in qualifying and in the race, no one crashed. No one had a major incident, so they didn't even have a minor incident. Hit the wall, damaged the suspension. It's a difficult circuit, tight, narrow, fast in one bit, a little bit like Baku. So I'm not going to give anyone less than a 5, but because a lot of the positions were gained in under the safety car, I'm not going to give a lot of high scoring results. There's not anywhere for drivers to pull off. There's not many places for drivers to pull off great overtakes, so there aren't many great ratings either, very high ones, And Mick Schumacher, I think, was the least impressive driver, although there's another driver that sort of could also fit into that role. But on the opposite end, Felix Rosenqvist gets a 10 out of 10, perfect weekend, took the pole position. He led the race to lap 60. The safety car, the timing of it, the field was bunched up, and Chip Ganassi had a better pit stop than Meyer Shank, and they lost the race. But he did everything he needed to do to win the race. There's nothing on his side where he made a mistake. So he gets a 10 out of 10. It's just a shame that Rosenqvist can't show this potential more often. He needs to be more consistently at the front putting in these sort of performances. Marcus Armstrong gets a 5 out of 10. He was anonymous all weekend. You can't, compare him with Rosenqvist. He just, I think he's famous for this race for holding up Joseph Newgarden. That's all he did, And I think his final result was compromised by a puncture. I'm not going to penalise him for the puncture, but he gets a 5 out of 10 for being anonymous. Rinus VK, he is the first driver. He gets a 6. He was the first driver to go on the alternative strategy, and it didn't really work, but he was brave to go on the alternative strategy. First driver to pull the pin on the pit stop. But he's overtaken by Nolan Siegel on the last lap, so it's hard to be too positive about Rinus VK. He gets a 6 out of 10. And Stingray Rob gets a 5. As I said, they kept it out of the wall. The alternative strategy didn't work. No pace. I think he was probably faster than Mick Schumacher, but he's probably along with Mick Schumacher, the two drivers that stood out as, and probably along with Roman Grosjean. I won't give any of these drivers less than a 5, but I think they're probably the 3 least impressive drivers. And it goes to show that fuel strategy, tyre strategy, a lot of that's thrown out the window when the safety car comes out, and we get a very predictable run to the flag, and this can happen. And I think safety cars, sometimes they spoil races. I think this race was a case of that. I think it would have been good if they had something like a virtual safety car they could have thrown for that piece of debris. It's not like there was a crashed car on the course. And as it was, Joseph Newgarden ran over that piece of debris. Obviously, he ran over it at a slower pace than if they'd been at full speed racing. And if he ran over it at full speed racing, there might have been a nasty accident. So I'm not disputing the safety car, but I'm disputing the fact that it was a full safety car rather than a virtual safety car, which I think would have been a more sensible approach. The other thing to take out of this weekend, Cole Kirkwood is very consistent this year, and if anyone is going to challenge Alex Palou for the title, it's going to be him. And Felix Rosenqvist, I don't understand how come he's so fast this weekend, and yet other weekends he's well outside the top 10. So I think in Alabama he's quite anonymous, definitely by comparison. So it's hard to understand why there's this fluctuation from week to week, or from race to race for some drivers. But from what I've seen so far, I think Cole Kirkwood's best bet, if he wants to win this championship, is to ace the ovals. I think that's Alex Palou's weak point. And it's not really like he's bad at ovals, just on the street circuits and the permanent racetracks, he seems like he's always going to be on the podium, if not winning the race. And it's only at the ovals he might, like we saw at Phoenix, he might have an issue. So I don't really see how anyone else is going to challenge him at this time, only Kirkwood. Of course, there's a long way to go in the season, but Patricia Ward needs to be more competitive and more consistent. Same for Christian Lundgaard. They both need to improve their qualifying, improve their consistency. Yeah, I don't see anyone else. But anyway, Alex Palou, we have to be very grateful that we get to see, such brilliance. We're watching it live. This driver could go for his 5th title, 4th in a row. Podium wins almost every race. We're lucky to watch brilliance playing out in front of our eyes.